Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I am here at the News Forum where all voices matter. How do First Nations gain access to financing and investment? Our guests today are part of the First Nations Finance Authority, which was created to help fill some gaps. Please welcome the President and CEO, Ernie Daniels, and also Jody Anderson, the FNFA's Strategy and Partnerships Advisor. Welcome to both of you.
Morning or afternoon.
Good.
Morning, Tony. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, great to have you guys both here. So maybe, Ernie, get us started. Just give our audience a bit of a sense of what is the First Nation Financing Authority and how was it created?
Yeah, good. Thank you for asking that question. So the First Nations Finance Authority is one of three institutions that were created under the First Nation Fiscal Management Act, which came into force in 2006, receiving all party support. I think you were in the government at the time, Tony. And
I was, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that, for passing this legislation and getting it through. So the First Nation Finance Authority under the Act is responsible. Our mandate is to access capital for First Nation governments. So First Nation bands, Indian Act bands all across Canada. So that work started in 2011 when we had an amendment to the Act that would allow First Nations to use own source revenue to leverage financing. So it took off from there. And in 2012, we issued our first loan to Member 2 First Nation and went on to build up a book of First Nations loans. And in 2014, we issued our first debenture in the capital markets. So it was the first time that a borrowing pool of First Nations garnered an investment grade credit rating, which was a single A at the time, and we're now at double A. So yeah, the Act allows First Nations to use their own source revenue and property tax revenues to leverage financing based on the credit ratings that the First Nations Finance Authority has to get the financing they need for infrastructure, economic development, even social development programs. So it's been a huge success since then. We've issued like 12 debentures to date. Now having lent out over $3 billion, creating in excess of 25,000 jobs with an economic impact of about $7 billion.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that. And Jody, from your perspective, what gap is this filling that needs to be filled so that First Nations can do these kinds of projects?
Thanks, Tony. That's a great question. So recently, as recent as last year, the Assembly of First Nations, in partnership with Indigenous Services Canada, produced a report called Closing the Infrastructure Gap. And it was reported that $349.2 billion of an infrastructure gap exists between our Indigenous communities and our non-Indigenous communities. So that would cover a number of different categories from buildings, education, in-the-ground infrastructure, connectivity, health, etc. So this is our starting point, Tony, where we really have to look at closing that gap so that our First Nation communities can move projects forward, increase social and economic development metrics and well-being index that matter best to their communities.
Sure. No, that makes total sense. Ernie, just to educate our audience a little bit, what's your governance structure at FNFA?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tony. It's the governance structure is made up of the First Nations that are part of the borrowing pool. So it's First Nations that really have skin in the game. They have everything to gain and lose in good and bad times. So every year, annually, we elect our board of directors from within our members. And what's really unique about it as well is we need unanimous consent from all of our not our borrowing members, the board of directors when we approve a loan and when we actually accept new members.
Right.
So that's a safeguard in the system, which is really, really good. So in effect, the FNFA is governed, managed, and operated by First Nations.
Perfect. All right, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be back with you after these messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. Our guests are Ernie Daniels, who's the president and CEO, and Jody Anderson, who is the strategy and partnerships advisor for the First Nations Finance Authority. So Ernie, maybe just give us a sense of what kinds of things you like. If somebody is a borrowing member, what do you provide for them that will help them reach their goal?
Yeah, so we provide the lowest cost of capital that we can garner from the capital markets through a series of investors. So First Nations, based on their own source revenue, we calculate a borrowing capacity based on certain leverage factors. So every revenue stream has a different leverage factor, and based on that, we work with the First Nations. We actually hold them hand in hand right through the process until they get their loan. So we have a pretty rigorous due diligence process that we work through the loan requests, and from there, the First Nations usually have something in mind that they want to do. Well, they always do, and yeah, so we can help them get equity into economic development projects. They can actually partner with other corporations into major developments like wind farms, LNG, and right down to helping a community build or access childcare services or elders' homes or even housing for members. And also schools. So First Nations, when they have own source revenue, are looking to really build the infrastructure that's really needed in their communities, because you know yourself that the federal government doesn't have a lot of money to do this. They operate on a different kind of funding mechanism. So this funding really helps them do that. It helps them to look at the projects they want to take for their social development, for their economic development, and really to look at trying to become, I guess, in a position of managing more wealth than really managing government funding.
Got it. Okay, that makes total sense. And Jody, your job, it says strategy and partnerships advisor. So are there other funding partners that you work with, or how does it work exactly?
We work directly with the communities, Tony, so that we can align their values and ensure that there is consensus and consent in terms of how we move forward. So having options is always great for the communities. Sometimes they can access levels of funding through provincial or federal levels of government that we may work in combination, or they may work with other private capital advisors or providers of capital. So I think we can work with it. We essentially work with the communities directly to see what their wishes are, what their priorities are, and can look at different options to structure different transactions so that it works in the best interest of the communities.
So maybe Jody, just walk us through. So a First Nation community comes to you and says, look, we have a business that we want to get into, or we think that we can get into wind farms or whatever it is. So how does that process go along from there?
That's a great question. So we often come and work with the community once a lot of the planning has been done. So they will work with their advisors, whether it's financial advisors, their auditors, subject matter experts, to look at a transaction. Like Ernie said, we will also do our own due diligence, look at their borrowing capacity to see if this is a a viable option for the community and do our assessment there. So depending on what the community is looking for, it could be an equity stake, it could be full ownership, it could be different types of structures. So we can look at different options for the community, different lengths of time to deliver the loan or what they're looking for. So we can help them look at different options. They can then decide what is best for them, ensuring that they still check all those boxes of the safeguard. And we work on their timeline. So some communities, it takes them a little bit longer to become comfortable, and they want to ensure that they're bouncing it off their advisors as well. So we often work with the community directly, their advisors, legal teams,
Right.
to ensure all the checks and balances are in place for our investors.
Perfect. We're going to take another break. We'll be back with our guests after these commercial messages. Please stay with us. And we're back here at Boom and Bust with representatives of the First Nations Finance Authority. We've got Ernie Daniels, who is the president and CEO, and Jody Anderson, who's in charge of strategy and partnerships. Jody, I'm going to go to you again just to start off, because you mentioned on your website that innovation is important, as a criteria or an aspiration, perhaps. Can you give examples of innovative initiatives that you've funded so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that our communities are certainly looking at is the power of their purchasing power and what that can provide to communities. So often in the past, we were looking at smaller economic development projects or infrastructure projects, but now we're seeing those types of complex projects and innovative strategies and structuring of these transactions climb significantly. So partnering with other communities, looking at larger global transactions. If we look at, for example, the seafood or the Clearwater seafood transaction that happened on the East Coast, this was the culmination of 7 Mi'kmaq communities who came together to purchase a 50% in equity stake in one of the largest seafood companies in the world. And one of those things that we had to figure out and kind of navigate was bringing a publicly traded company to a privately held company and going through this process, which had never been done in our Indigenous communities previously. So we're seeing a number of really fascinating projects that are quite material in size, and the impact that has on the communities has been absolutely extraordinary.
And how is that seafood company doing now? Has it been a commercial success?
It's been a commercial success. The fact that it is now Indigenous led has now garnered international support. The communities are doing wonderful things with the revenue that's been provided. And we're seeing all types of success stories, from summer students to placement in executive positions. And it's touching a number of different areas and categories within the company. So it's been absolute wonderful story.
Fantastic. Ernie, obviously, there's been a lot of talk in this election period about the massive, and you referenced this in relation to Indigenous as well, but the whole country has a massive infrastructure deficit. Now, maybe just give us your comments on that and how FNFA can help with that, perhaps.
Yeah, as Jody mentioned, the estimated infrastructure gap that exists in our communities is close to $350 billion. And so that's a lot of money. So this is just to really bring us on par with other municipalities and other communities across the country. So, this was obviously a buildup of lack of funding throughout the years, and it just the way funding mechanisms work. So really, the main contributor to that is the funding model. I keep going back to the funding model, but it's really important to understand it. Because the way the federal government funds First Nations communities in terms of infrastructure is they do it on a budget basis. So it's not leveraged over a long period of time, like 10, 20, 30 years, like in most cases where other levels of government finance infrastructure. So that contributed to the problem. And really, based on the work that we've been doing to date, leveraging First Nations own source revenue, we see an opportunity that the government, the federal government, can look at to really monetize government transfers over a longer period of time, say 20, 30 years, like a house mortgage.
Right.
So based on a certain revenue stream, we can start to close the infrastructure gap today. And what's really important is you're doing it at today's dollars, not tomorrow's inflated dollars. And that's part of the problem as well for the massive size of the infrastructure gap is inflation is a large part of that, because a lot of these infrastructure projects have been, required for a number of years in our communities. It just takes a while to get some of them through, if they even can get it through. I'll give you an example. We had a First Nation in Alberta that actually built their own school, and they did it because based on their, their standing, because infrastructure needs are really based on as needed basis. They would have had to wait 70 years before they got to school.
Wow. Yeah.
And so,
exactly.
how many generations of kids is that?
Yeah,
So they just built their own, and they did it on time and on budget and their own design. So
great example.
So that's what's really happening in our communities today.
Great example. We're just going to take another brief break. We'll be back with you after these messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Ernie Daniels. He's the president and CEO of the First Nation Finance Authority, and Jody Anderson, who is in charge of strategy and partnership. Ernie, just go back to you for 1 second. Obviously, you and your organization know a lot about the struggle that Indigenous businesses have had, not just in relation to what you're doing, but more generally. So maybe give our audience a little bit of a sense of what other impediments do exist. I mean, I think you mentioned bonding as one of the issues. So maybe talk about that, or whatever else is an impediment to Indigenous businesses succeeding.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So really, there's a couple of things. Well, there's more than a couple of things, but the things that really come to the top of mind is when Indigenous businesses are looking to get involved into like larger projects, what they really lack is equity. And so I think it's a big problem for just about all sectors, but equity is one of the problems that we've always faced, because for years under the Indian Act, we're not able to own land, so we couldn't build up a really an equity base to look at investing into bigger projects. But at the same time, and Jody could, add to this a bit more. The federal government has a large procurement budget or list of programs that they go through. They have on the books, and First Nation businesses really have difficulty in accessing a lot of these contracts, and it's because of the inability to get cost-effective surety bonding to allow them to bid on these projects successfully. So that's a major impediment in that regard. But I think really the lack of equity and the ability to access bonding insurance is really a big impediment.
Jody, can you add anything to that?
Yeah, sure, Tony. I think, the biggest impediment when we look at access to capital and access to bonding sits within the Indian Act. And Section 89 is one of those sections that really prevents and creates barriers for status Indians, in particular, to use existing assets as collateral or help to leverage for building wealth. And so what the federal government has done recently is created a mandate of a 5% procurement set aside in a lot of projects, which is a wonderful thing to see and is certainly a floor to start at. Having said that, myself as a status Indian, if I'm living on reserve and go and want to bid on these projects, there's a barrier there because bonding is required, understandably so, but I cannot get access to bonding. So oftentimes have to use workarounds, which are not cost effective. They're often more expensive and or just the door is shut. And so it's not equitable for a lot of our contractors to access bonding and surety to participate and help build wealth from an economic standpoint. So there are still some barriers from an equality position that we're looking at, and certainly surety and bonding is one of them.
We've got about a minute left. Jody, what about the position of young Indigenous entrepreneurs? Anything you can say about that?
Absolutely. I think our population is the fastest growing population in Canada. And certainly the entrepreneurs that we're seeing are the backbone of our First Nation communities and need to be supported, need to be empowered in order to do that. And without access to capital, it really creates a barrier. We have some wonderful institutions out there who provide capacity and help open those doors, but we're still not seeing affordable rates, Tony, where our entrepreneurs can really access capital where that it will make a difference and engage and help our communities and businesses scale up.
Well, a really interesting discussion with both of you. I want to thank you for joining the program today and certainly wish you success for yourselves and the First Nation Finance Authority. Thanks for being on the program today.
Miigwech, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Really interesting discussion there, getting a sense of Indigenous business projects, how to finance them, how to make them successful. I hope you enjoyed the show as well. Thank you for watching.